The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of Afghanistan's Helmand province when Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez first laid eyes on the Barrett M82A1 sniper rifle. The weapon stood nearly 5 feet tall, its black metal gleaming against the dusty backdrop of forward operating base Thunder. Maya had been deployed with the 75th Ranger Regiment for 8 months, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Commander Jackson Walsh, a battle-hardened Navy SEAL with 20 years of experience, watched as Maya approached the weapon with reverence. Her small frame seemed dwarfed by the massive rifle, yet there was something in her eyes that caught his attention. Most soldiers were intimidated by the Barrett's reputation, but Maya looked at it like an old friend she hadn't seen in years. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Commander Walsh called out, his voice cutting through the desert wind. "You ever fired one of these before?" Maya turned, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, dust already settling on her uniform despite the early hour. "No, sir, but I've studied the specifications. Effective range up to 1,800 meters, capable of penetrating light armor, weighs about 30 pounds. She paused, running her fingers along the rifle scope. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about precision shooting. He was a Marine sniper in Vietnam." The commander raised an eyebrow. Maya Rodriguez had an impressive service record, graduating top of her class from sniper school at Fort Benning. Her instructors had noted her exceptional hand-eye coordination and an almost supernatural ability to read wind patterns and environmental conditions. But the Barrett was different from anything she'd trained with. This wasn't just a precision instrument. It was a game-changer on the battlefield. "Your grandfather, huh?" Commander Walsh stepped closer, his weathered face showing genuine interest. "What was his name?" "Sergeant Major Carlos Rodriguez, sir. He served 3 tours, credited with 47 confirmed kills." Maya's voice carried a note of pride mixed with solemnity. "He used to say that every shot tells a story, and the best snipers are the ones who can read the ending before they pull the trigger." The conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, the base commander, who approached with urgent strides. His face was grim, the kind of expression that usually meant bad news was coming. Behind him followed Captain Torres from Intelligence and Sergeant Major Williams, the senior enlisted advisor. "Commander Walsh, we've got a situation developing in Sector 7. Morrison began without preamble. "Intelligence indicates high-value targets moving through the Kajaki Dam area. We need your team ready for insertion within the hour." Maya felt her pulse quicken. Sector 7 was notorious among the troops, a maze of compounds and rocky outcroppings that had claimed too many American lives. The Taliban had turned it into a fortress, using the terrain to their advantage and making conventional assault nearly impossible. Commander Walsh nodded grimly. "What's the target profile, Colonel?" Captain Torres stepped forward, unfolding a detailed map marked with red circles and tactical notations. "We've identified 3 high-priority targets. Abdul Rahmanzadeh, suspected bomb maker responsible for at least a dozen IED attacks on coalition forces. Hassan Mahmoud, a Taliban commander coordinating weapons smuggling from Pakistan. And the big fish, Mullah Omar Khattak, regional Taliban leader who's been organizing attacks throughout the province." The intelligence officer pointed to a cluster of buildings approximately 3 kilometers from the nearest safe observation point. "The problem is the distance. Our usual sniper positions can't reach the target area effectively. The terrain forces us to set up much further back than ideal." Maya studied the map intently, her mind automatically calculating angles, wind patterns, and elevation changes. She'd grown up hunting in the mountains of Colorado with her father and grandfather, learning to read the landscape like a book. Something about the geography reminded her of the hunting trips where she'd made impossibly long shots that had amazed her family. "Sir," Maya spoke up, surprising herself with her boldness. "What's the exact distance from Point Alpha to the target compound?" Captain Torres checked his notes. "Approximately 3,200 meters. Give or take 50 meters depending on the specific building." A hush fell over the group. Even seasoned snipers rarely attempted shots beyond 2,000 meters under combat conditions. The longest confirmed sniper kill in military history at that time was just over 2,400 meters, achieved by a Canadian sniper in Afghanistan. What they were discussing was beyond the realm of normal tactical operations. Commander Walsh looked at Maya with new interest. "Sergeant Rodriguez, you thinking what I think you're thinking?" Maya felt every eye on her as she nodded slowly. "The Barrett is capable of that range, sir. With the right environmental conditions and proper calculations, it's theoretically possible." "Theoretically," Lieutenant Colonel Morrison repeated, his voice skeptical. "Sergeant, we're talking about real combat, not a controlled range environment. At that distance, you're dealing with bullet drop of over 40 feet, wind drift that could push your shot off target by yards, not inches, and atmospheric conditions that change by the minute." But Maya was already running calculations in her head, factoring in the altitude, temperature, and humidity readings she'd memorized from the morning briefings. Her grandfather had taught her that great shooters didn't just aim at where the target was, they aimed at where it would be, accounting for every variable that could affect the bullet's flight path. "I understand the challenges, sir," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was contemplating. "But these targets have been evading capture for months. If we can't reach them through conventional means, maybe it's time to try something unconventional." Sergeant Major Williams, a Vietnam veteran who'd seen every type of military operation imaginable, studied Maya with calculating eyes. He'd watched young soldiers make bold claims before, but something about her confidence felt different. It wasn't bravado. It was the quiet certainty of someone who truly understood their capabilities. "Sergeant," Williams said finally, "you realize that if you miss at that range, you're not just missing the target. You're potentially exposing the entire team's position and compromising the mission." Maya nodded solemnly. "Yes, Sergeant Major. I also realize that if we don't try, these targets will continue killing American soldiers and Afghan civilians." Commander Walsh made his decision. "We'll run some preliminary tests this afternoon. If Sergeant Rodriguez can demonstrate accuracy at extended range under control conditions, we'll consider incorporating the Barrett into tomorrow's mission planning." As the meeting dispersed, Maya felt a mixture of excitement and terror coursing through her veins. She just volunteered for something that could make or break her military career. More importantly, she'd volunteered for something that could save American lives if she succeeded or endanger them if she failed. Walking back toward the Barrett rifle, Maya thought about her grandfather's words echoing in her mind. Every shot tells a story. As she prepared for the most important test of her life, she wondered what story this shot would tell. The afternoon sun blazed overhead as Maya positioned herself behind the Barrett M82A1 at the forward edge of the testing range. Word had spread quickly through forward operating base Thunder about the crazy sergeant who thought she could make a 3,000-meter shot, and a small crowd of curious soldiers had gathered at a respectful distance. Among them were several seasoned snipers who'd come to watch what they expected would be an expensive demonstration of overconfidence. Commander Walsh crouched beside Maya, his binoculars trained on the target zone. "Remember, Sergeant, this isn't about proving anything to anyone else. This is about honest assessment of capabilities under combat conditions." Maya nodded, her hand steady as she made minute adjustments to the rifle's scope. The Barrett felt different from any weapon she'd ever handled. Its weight was substantial but balanced. The trigger had a crisp, clean break that reminded her of her grandfather's hunting rifles, just scaled up for much more serious purposes. "Target is a standard silhouette at 3,180 meters, announced Captain Torres through the radio. Wind is currently 5 to 7 knots from the southwest, gusting to 10. Temperature 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity 38%. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, visualizing the bullet's trajectory. At this distance, the .50 caliber bullet would take nearly 4 seconds to reach the target. In combat, that meant accounting not just for where the target was when she fired, but where it would be when the bullet arrived. The physics involved were staggering. The bullet would drop over 40 feet during its flight and could drift several yards off target if she miscalculated the wind. Behind her, she heard Sergeant Major Williams speaking quietly to another soldier. I've seen a lot of shooters in 30 years of service. Most of them talk big until they're actually behind a rifle. Let's see if this one's different. Maya began her breathing routine, the same one her grandfather had taught her during countless hunting trips in the Colorado Rockies. Breathe in deeply, let half the air out, hold, squeeze the trigger during the natural pause between heartbeats. But this wasn't a deer at 200 yards. This was a shot that would require every skill she'd ever developed. Through the scope, the target seemed impossibly small. Even with the Barrett's powerful optics, she was looking at a tiny speck against the desert backdrop. Maya made micro-adjustments to account for the distance, elevation, and atmospheric conditions. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. The rifle is just a tool, Maya. The real weapon is your mind. Wind's picking up, Commander Walsh observed, watching his anemometer. Now reading 8 to 12 knots with gusts to 15. Maya made another adjustment to her point of aim, compensating for the increased wind drift. At this distance, a 5-knot change in wind speed could easily push her shot 3 feet off target. She'd studied ballistics tables for hours the night before, but there was no substitute for reading the actual conditions and trusting her instincts. "Whenever you're ready, Sergeant," Walsh said quietly. Maya settled deeper into her shooting position, feeling the Barrett stock against her shoulder. The weapon's bipod was steady on the sand-filled shooting bench, and she'd adjusted her body position to achieve perfect natural point of aim. Everything felt right, but at this distance, feeling right and hitting the target were two very different things. Through her earpiece, she heard Captain Torres providing updates from the spotting position. Target area clear. No movement detected. Conditions are as good as they're going to get. Maya began her final breathing sequence. In through the nose, out through the mouth, settling into the natural rhythm that would allow her to time the shot perfectly. Her index finger found the trigger, and she began applying gradual backward pressure. The Barrett erupted with a thunderous roar that echoed across the desert landscape. The massive rifle's recoil was substantial but manageable, and Maya maintained her sight picture to watch the bullet's impact. For what seemed like an eternity, though it was actually less than 4 seconds, there was only silence and anticipation. Then, Captain Torres's voice crackled through the radio. "Impact observed. Dead center mass." The crowd of observing soldiers erupted in cheers and applause. Maya remained motionless behind the rifle, hardly believing what had just happened. She made the shot, but part of her wondered if it had been luck rather than skill. Commander Walsh was already on his radio, calling for another target to be placed at the same distance. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I need you to do that again. 1 shot could be luck. 2 shots prove capability." Maya felt her heart pounding as she prepared for the second attempt. The pressure was even greater now because she'd proven it was possible. Missing the second shot would raise questions about whether the first had indeed been luck. The new target was positioned slightly to the left of the first impact point, requiring her to adjust her point of aim. Maya went through the same methodical process, checking wind conditions, atmospheric pressure, and making the necessary calculations. This time, she felt the weight of expectation from every person watching. The second shot rang out across the range with the same thunderous report. Maya held her position, watching through the scope as the seconds ticked by. When the impact came, it was even more precise than the first, a perfect center hit that left no doubt about her capabilities. "Outstanding shooting, Sergeant," Commander Walsh said, his voice carrying a new note of respect. "I've never seen anything like that." As Maya finally lifted her head from the scope, she saw Lieutenant Colonel Morrison approaching with a serious expression. Behind him walked a man she didn't recognize, someone in civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of military or intelligence personnel. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Morrison began, "I'd like you to meet Special Agent Davidson from the Defense Intelligence Agency. He's been monitoring our communications regarding tomorrow's mission." Agent Davidson extended his hand, his grip firm, and his eyes sharp with intelligence. "Sergeant, that was extraordinary shooting. I've been briefed on your target profile for tomorrow's operation, and I have to tell you, the intelligence value of eliminating those 3 targets cannot be overstated. Maya felt a chill despite the desert heat. The reality of what she was being asked to do was finally sinking in. This wasn't just about proving she could make an impossible shot. It was about using that capability to eliminate human targets who would be armed and dangerous. "Sir, I understand the importance of the mission," Maya replied. "But I need to know something. At that range, with the conditions we're facing, I might only get one shot before our position is compromised. Which target should be the priority?" Agent Davidson consulted his notes. Mullah Omar Khattak is the primary target. He's the operational commander for Taliban forces throughout this region. Eliminating him would disrupt their command structure for months, possibly longer. Commander Walsh nodded agreement. "The intelligence is solid, Sergeant. These aren't just random targets. They're key nodes in the terrorist network that's been killing American soldiers and Afghan civilians." Maya absorbed this information while cleaning the Barrett rifle with methodical precision. Tomorrow's mission would require everything she'd learned about long-range shooting, but it would also test her ability to perform under the ultimate pressure. There would be no do-overs, no second chances to get it right. As the sun began setting over the Afghan mountains, casting long shadows across the desert landscape, Maya thought again about her grandfather's words. Every shot tells a story. Tomorrow, she would begin writing a story that could change the course of the war in this small corner of Afghanistan. That night, as she lay in her bunk reviewing ballistics tables and weather forecasts, Maya realized that her life had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just another soldier serving her country. She had become a strategic asset capable of reaching targets that conventional forces couldn't touch. The weight of that responsibility was both humbling and terrifying. The helicopter's rotors cut through the pre-dawn darkness as Maya and the SEAL team lifted off from forward operating base Thunder. Through her night vision goggles, she watched the Afghan landscape pass below, an endless expanse of rocky mountains and deep valleys that had swallowed countless armies throughout history. The Barrett M82A1 lay secure beside her, its case reinforced for the harsh conditions they would face. Commander Walsh spoke through the aircraft's intercom system, his voice calm despite the magnitude of their mission. "Insertion point is 15 clicks from the target zone. We'll move on foot through the mountain passes to avoid Taliban patrol routes. Estimated time to shooting position is 6 hours." Maya checked her equipment one final time. Besides the Barrett, she carried her standard M4 carbine, emergency medical supplies, and enough ammunition to sustain a prolonged engagement if things went wrong. The weight was considerable, but she trained extensively with heavy loads during her preparation for deployment. Sitting across from her was Petty Officer First Class Marcus Chun, the team's communications specialist and designated spotter for the mission. Chun had 15 years of experience in special operations and had worked with some of the military's best snipers. He'd studied Maya's shooting performance from the previous day and reviewed the tactical plan with a thorough attention to detail that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. "Sergeant," Chun said quietly, "I've calculated atmospheric conditions for the target zone based on current weather data. At 0800 hours, we should have optimal conditions, minimal wind, stable temperature gradient, and excellent visibility." Maya nodded, grateful for Chen's expertise. In sniper operations, the spotter was often more important than the shooter. Chen would be responsible for reading environmental conditions, calling wind adjustments, and providing security while Maya focused on making the shot. The helicopter began its descent toward the landing zone, a small clearing surrounded by towering peaks that provided natural concealment from Taliban observation posts. As they touched down, Maya felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with stepping into hostile territory. The team moved out immediately, with Commander Walsh taking point and 2 other SEALs providing security. Maya found herself in the middle of the formation, the Barrett's weight distributed between herself and Chun. Every step had to be calculated carefully. The mountain terrain was treacherous enough without carrying precision equipment that couldn't afford to be damaged. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the temperature dropped noticeably. Maya's breath formed small clouds in the thin air, and she could feel the altitude affecting her stamina. At 8,000 feet above sea level, every breath contained less oxygen than her body was accustomed to, but she'd trained for these conditions during mountain warfare courses in Colorado. After 3 hours of steady climbing, Commander Walsh called a halt near a small cave formation that provided excellent concealment. "Rest break," he announced quietly. "Hydrate and check equipment. We're halfway to the shooting position." Maya used the break to inspect the Barrett rifle carefully. The weapon had been designed to withstand harsh conditions, but mountain travel could introduce problems that wouldn't be apparent until it was too late. She checked the scope mounts, verified the zero hadn't shifted, and ensured the barrel was clear of any debris. Chen was already setting up his spotting scope and range-finding equipment. "Target zone is visible from here," he reported. "Approximately 4,200 meters northeast. I can identify the compound where intelligence believes the targets are located." Through her own binoculars, Maya could see the cluster of buildings that represented their objective. Even at this distance, the structures looked small and insignificant against the vast landscape. It was hard to believe that eliminating 3 men in those buildings could have strategic significance for the entire war effort. "Movement in the compound," Chun announced suddenly. "I count at least 6 individuals, possibly more. They appear to be conducting some type of meeting or planning session." Commander Walsh moved to Chen's position and peered through the spotting scope. "Confirm that's our target location, Petty Officer. We can't afford any mistakes." Chun compared the buildings to satellite photos and GPS coordinates from her mission briefing. "Positive identification, Commander. That's the primary target compound, matching all intelligence indicators." As they resumed their movement toward the final shooting position, Maya's mind focused on the task ahead. The shot she would attempt would be nearly 500 meters farther than her successful test firing from the previous day. At 3,247 meters, she would be pushing the Barrett rifle to the absolute limits of its effective range. The final approach to their shooting position required extreme caution. They were now within potential observation range of Taliban sentries, and any movement that attracted attention could compromise the entire mission. The team moved in short bounds, using natural cover and terrain features to mask their advance. When they finally reached the predetermined shooting site, Maya was impressed by the natural advantages it offered. A rocky outcropping provided excellent concealment, while offering an unobstructed view of the target zone. The position was elevated approximately 200 meters above the target compound, which would help with bullet trajectory calculations. Chun immediately began setting up his spotting equipment, while Maya prepared the Barrett rifle for action. She extended the bipod legs and adjusted them for the uneven terrain, ensuring the weapon was perfectly stable. The rifle's muzzle brake would help control recoil, but at this range, even the slightest movement could send the bullet yards off target. "Range to target 3,247 meters, Chen announced after taking multiple measurements with his laser rangefinder. "Elevation difference, plus 198 meters. Current wind reading, 4 knots from the west-southwest." Maya began inputting data into her ballistic calculator, a small handheld computer that would help her determine the precise scope adjustments needed for the shot. At this distance, the bullet would drop over 50 feet during its flight and take nearly 5 seconds to reach the target. Through her scope, Maya could see movement in the compound's central courtyard. Several figures were gathered around what appeared to be a table or planning surface. Intelligence had indicated that the targets typically met for operational planning during the early morning hours, and it appeared that information was accurate. "I have visual confirmation of multiple targets in the compound," Maya reported quietly, awaiting positive identification of primary target. Chun adjusted his spotting scope's magnification and studied the figures carefully. After several minutes of observation, he provided the confirmation Maya needed. "Primary target identified. Individual matching Mullah Omar Khattak's physical description is visible in the courtyard's northeast corner." Maya felt her heart rate increase as the moment of truth approached. Everything she'd trained for, all the preparation and calculation had led to this single shot. At 3,247 meters, she would be attempting one of the longest sniper shots in military history, and the success or failure of the mission depended entirely on her ability to execute under pressure. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but Maya drew strength from her training and her grandfather's teachings. As she settled behind the Barrett rifle and began her final preparations, she knew that the next few minutes would define not just the mission's success, but her entire military career. Maya's breathing was controlled and steady as she settled into her final shooting position behind the Barrett M82A1. Through the powerful scope, Mullah Omar Khattak appeared as a small figure moving around the compound courtyard, unaware that death was being calculated from over 3 kilometers away. The morning air was crisp and clear, providing excellent visibility across the vast distance that separated hunter from target. Petty Officer Chun lay beside her with his spotting scope, continuously monitoring wind conditions and environmental factors that could affect the bullet's trajectory. "Wind holding steady at 4 knots west-southwest," he whispered. "Atmospheric pressure stable. Mirage conditions minimal." The mathematics of the shot were staggering. Maya's ballistic calculator indicated that she needed to aim approximately 15 feet above her target to account for bullet drop. The projectile would lose significant velocity over the 3,247-meter flight path, and even tiny variations in atmospheric conditions could push her shot off target by several feet. Commander Walsh positioned himself where he could observe both the shooting position and potential approach routes that enemy forces might use to compromise their location. "Sergeant Rodriguez, you have a narrow window of opportunity. Intelligence indicates increased Taliban patrol activity in this area after 0900 hours." Maya glanced at her watch, 0827 hours. She had perhaps 30 minutes to execute the mission before their position became untenable. Through her scope, she could see that several figures had gathered around Mullah Omar Khattak, engaged in what appeared to be an intense discussion. Intelligence had suggested that morning planning sessions often involve coordination of upcoming attacks against coalition forces. "Target is stationary," Chen reported. "Clear sight picture. Recommend taking the shot when ready." But Maya hesitated. Something her grandfather had taught her during their hunting trips echoed in her mind. Never take a shot unless you're absolutely certain of your target and completely confident in the outcome. At this distance, with so many variables in play, absolute certainty was an impossible standard. She adjusted her scope settings one final time, accounting for the specific atmospheric conditions and the exact range to target. The Barrett rifle felt solid and stable beneath her, its bipod firmly planted on the rocky surface. Every piece of equipment had been checked and rechecked, every calculation verified multiple times. Through the scope, Maya watched Khattak move toward the center of the courtyard, apparently addressing the other figures gathered there. Intelligence photos had shown him to be a tall, bearded man who typically wore traditional Afghan robes and a distinctive white turban. The figure in her crosshairs matched that description perfectly. "Positive target identification confirmed," Maya announced quietly. "Mullah Omar Khattak is in the open, approximately center mass of the compound." Chun made minute adjustments to his spotting scope. "I concur with target identification. Wind remains steady. Atmospheric conditions optimal. This is your shot window, Sergeant." Maya began her final breathing sequence, the same ritual her grandfather had taught her 20 years earlier in the Colorado mountains. Deep breath in, partial exhale, hold, find a natural respiratory pause, and squeeze the trigger with steady, increasing pressure. But this wasn't a hunting shot at a stationary animal. This was a combat engagement against an enemy commander who could move at any moment. The crosshairs of her scope settled on Khattak's center mass. At this distance, aiming for a headshot would be impossibly precise, but center mass provided a target area that gave her the best probability of success. Maya's finger found the trigger and began applying gradual backward pressure. Suddenly, Kotak began moving toward one of the compound buildings. Maya tracked him smoothly with her scope, maintaining the sight picture as he walked across the courtyard. Her training had emphasized the importance of taking shots when targets were stationary, but this might be her only opportunity. Target is moving, Chen observed. Recommend holding until he stops. But Maya could see through her scope that Kotak was approaching the building entrance. If he went inside, the opportunity would be lost, and they might not get another chance before Taliban patrols forced them to abandon the position. The decision to shoot or wait rested entirely with her. Kotak paused at the building entrance, turning to address someone behind him. For a moment, he was perfectly still, presenting the ideal target picture Maya had been waiting for. She knew that this was the moment. Everything had aligned perfectly, and any delay would only introduce new variables that could compromise the shot. Maya's finger completed its steady pressure on the Barrett's trigger. The massive rifle erupted with a thunderous roar that echoed across the mountain landscape. Its muzzle brake, directing gases sideways to reduce felt recoil. The 750-grain bullet left the barrel at nearly 2,800 feet per second, beginning its 5-second journey across the Afghan countryside. Through her scope, Maya maintained her sight picture, watching the target area for impact. The seconds seemed to stretch into eternity as the bullet traced its high arc through the thin mountain air. At this distance, she could actually see the projectile's vapor trail against the clear morning sky. Chun counted off the time of flight. 3 seconds, 4 seconds. Then the impact came. Through her scope, Maya saw Kotak suddenly collapse, his body spinning from the massive kinetic energy transfer of the .50 caliber bullet. The other figures in the compound scattered in confusion, diving for cover as they tried to comprehend what had just happened. Confirmed hit, Chen announced. Target down. Mullah Omar Kotak is down. But Maya remained focused on her scope, already searching for secondary targets. According to their intelligence briefing, Abdul Rahmanzadeh and Hassan Mahmoud were also supposed to be present at the compound. If she could eliminate multiple high-value targets with follow-up shots, the tactical advantage would be enormous. Through the chaos in the compound, Maya identified another figure who matched the physical description of Hassan Mahmoud. He was moving toward cover behind one of the buildings, but for a moment he was exposed in the open courtyard. Maya quickly recalculated her point of aim and prepared for a second shot. The second shot rang out 45 seconds after the first. This time, Maya watched as the bullet struck its target with devastating effect, eliminating the second Taliban commander as he attempted to reach safety. The remaining figures in the compound had now completely disappeared from view, seeking shelter inside buildings or behind walls. 2 confirmed kills, Chen reported with professional satisfaction. Outstanding shooting, Sergeant. That's the longest confirmed sniper kill I've ever witnessed. But Maya's professional focus remained absolute. She continued scanning the compound for any sign of the third target, Abdul Rahmanzadeh. However, the remaining Taliban fighters had learned from the fate of their commanders and were no longer exposing themselves in open areas. Commander Walsh was already preparing for their extraction. Outstanding work, Sergeant Rodriguez. But we need to move immediately. Those shots will have been heard for miles, and every Taliban fighter in the region will be heading this way. As Maya began breaking down the Barrett rifle for transport, she felt a mixture of professional satisfaction and sober reality. She had just made what would later be confirmed as the longest sniper kill in military history at that time. 3,247 meters under combat conditions. But more importantly, she had eliminated 2 key terrorist leaders who had been responsible for planning attacks that had killed American soldiers and Afghan civilians. The team began their withdrawal from the shooting position, moving quickly but carefully through the mountain terrain. Behind them, the compound that had housed some of the region's most wanted terrorists now lay silent, its leadership structure permanently disrupted by 2 precise shots fired from an impossible distance. The extraction helicopter thundered through the Afghan sky as Maya sat quietly, the Barrett M82A1 secured beside her once again. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, replaced by the profound realization of what she had accomplished. In the span of less than 2 minutes, she had fundamentally altered the tactical situation in this corner of Afghanistan, eliminating 2 high-value targets from a distance that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. Commander Walsh sat across from her, his weathered face showing a mixture of professional admiration and genuine curiosity. Throughout his 20 years of military service, including multiple deployments with elite special operations units, he had never witnessed shooting of this caliber. The mathematics alone were staggering. A successful engagement at 3,247 meters required not just exceptional marksmanship, but an almost intuitive understanding of ballistics, atmospheric conditions, and environmental factors. As the helicopter began its approach to forward operating base Thunder, Walsh leaned forward, his voice barely audible above the rotor noise. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I have to ask you something that's been bothering me since yesterday." Maya looked up, still processing the events of the morning. The successful elimination of Mullah Omar Khattak and Hassan Mahmoud would undoubtedly save American and Afghan lives, but she was also acutely aware that she had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She was no longer just a soldier. She had become a strategic weapon. "Sir," she replied, meeting his gaze directly. Commander Walsh paused, as if carefully considering his words. "Yesterday was the first time you'd ever fired a Barrett .50 caliber rifle, correct? You'd never even touched one before arriving at this base." "That's correct, sir," Maya confirmed. "I'd studied the specifications and ballistics tables, but I'd never actually fired the weapon system." Walsh shook his head in amazement. "Sergeant, I've worked with some of the military's best snipers. Marines, Army Rangers, SEALs, Delta Force operators. Most of them trained for years to achieve accuracy at 1,500 to 2,000 meters. What you accomplished today, 3,247 meters with 2 confirmed kills, that's beyond anything I've seen in 2 decades of service." Maya felt uncomfortable with the praise. Her grandfather had taught her that exceptional shooting was as much about mental discipline and preparation as it was about physical skill. "Sir, my grandfather spent years teaching me to read environmental conditions and calculate long-range shots. The principles are the same regardless of the specific weapon system." But Walsh pressed on, clearly fascinated by the technical aspects of what he'd witnessed. "Sergeant, the ballistic calculations for a 3,200-meter shot with a .50 caliber rifle involve dozens of variables. Bullet drop, wind drift, atmospheric pressure, temperature gradients, the Coriolis effect, even the rotation of the Earth becomes a factor at that distance. How did you acquire that level of ballistic knowledge?" Maya thought back to the countless hours she'd spent with her grandfather in the Colorado mountains, learning to read wind patterns by watching grass movement and feeling air currents on her skin. She remembered studying ballistics textbooks during high school, while her classmates focused on social media and television. The foundation for today's achievement had been built over years of dedicated study and practice. "My grandfather was more than just a Marine sniper, sir. After Vietnam, he became obsessed with long-range shooting. He studied ballistics at the university level, corresponded with ammunition manufacturers, and spent his weekends testing different loads and environmental conditions. He treated precision shooting like a science, and he passed that knowledge on to me." Commander Walsh nodded thoughtfully. "That explains the theoretical knowledge, but theory and practical application are very different things. What you demonstrated today requires not just understanding the math, but having the confidence to execute under extreme pressure." The helicopter touched down at forward operating base Thunder, but Walsh made no immediate move to disembark. Instead, he continued his inquiry, clearly driven by professional curiosity about what he'd witnessed. "Sergeant, I need to ask this directly. Who gave you the Barrett .50? I mean, who made the decision to assign that weapon system to someone with no prior experience on the platform?" Maya paused, realizing that this question went to the heart of how she'd ended up in this extraordinary situation. "Sir, technically, no one assigned it to me. When I saw the weapon yesterday morning, I expressed interest based on my study of its capabilities. You were the one who authorized me to fire it. But someone had to make the initial decision to bring a Barrett rifle to this base, Walsh insisted. Those weapons don't just appear randomly. Someone in the supply chain determined that we needed that capability here. As they finally exited the helicopter, Maya realized that Walsh's question highlighted something she hadn't considered. The Barrett M82A1 was specialized equipment, not standard issue for most combat units. Its presence at forward operating base, Thunder suggested, that someone in the command structure had anticipated the need for extreme long-range precision shooting. Later that afternoon, as Maya cleaned and maintained the Barrett rifle, Lieutenant Colonel Morrison approached with several other senior officers, including some she didn't recognize. Their expressions were serious, and she sensed that this conversation would be different from the celebratory atmosphere that had followed her successful test firing. Sergeant Rodriguez, Morrison began formally. I'd like you to meet Colonel Patricia Henderson from Special Operations Command. She has some questions about your performance today. Colonel Henderson stepped forward, her demeanor professional but intense. She was a small woman with steel gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to dealing with classified information at the highest levels. Sergeant, your shooting today has attracted attention at levels well above this base. A 3,247-meter confirmed kill represents a significant advancement in military precision shooting capabilities. Maya felt a chill as she realized that her actions had implications far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Ma'am, I was simply executing the mission as assigned. Indeed, Henderson replied, but your capabilities raise questions about how we identify and develop exceptional talent within our ranks. Tell me, Sergeant, who first recognized your potential as a long-range marksman? Maya thought carefully before responding. The truth was that her path to this moment had been largely accidental. She'd enlisted in the Army seeking adventure and the opportunity to serve her country, but her assignment to sniper training had been based more on aptitude tests and psychological evaluations than on any demonstrated shooting ability. Ma'am, my sniper training instructors at Fort Benning identified my potential, but the foundation was laid by my grandfather's teaching during my childhood. Colonel Henderson made notes in a small book. Sergeant, I'm going to ask you the same question that Commander Walsh posed. Who gave you the Barrett .50? But I'm asking it in a different context. I want to know how a weapon system of that capability ended up in the hands of someone who could use it to such devastating effect. As Maya considered her response, she began to understand that this conversation was about more than just her individual performance. Her success had apparently revealed gaps in the military's ability to identify and develop specialized capabilities. The question of who gave her the Barrett was really about how the military could better match exceptional talent with appropriate equipment. Ma'am, Maya replied finally, I think the real question isn't who gave me the Barrett, but how many other soldiers with similar potential are serving in conventional roles without access to the equipment that could maximize their capabilities. Colonel Henderson smiled for the first time during their conversation. Sergeant Rodriguez, that's exactly the question we need to answer. As the senior officers departed, Maya realized that her shot heard around the world had done more than eliminate two terrorist leaders. It had also started a conversation about how the military identifies, develops, and deploys exceptional talent. The Barrett .50 caliber rifle had been the tool, but the real weapon had been the years of preparation and training that her grandfather had provided in the mountains of Colorado. Looking back at the Barrett rifle, Maya understood that her grandfather's legacy had just taken on new significance. Every shot tells a story, he had always said. Today's story was about the power of preparation, the importance of recognizing potential, and the devastating effectiveness of precision applied at the right moment. It was a story that would reshape how the military thought about long-range precision shooting for years to come.